This is Tim Keller, and this is a talk, high-level talk about white paper number 10, which is what we call city theory. Now, this particular paper is new in the sense, of course, all the papers are new, but what is not really in most city training around the world, and it's not in Center Church, is to move beyond just what the Bible says about the city and try to learn how your particular city actually works. This is, let me start by saying this particular paper is first going to be looking at urban trends, what things are actually happening in cities across the world. But then it wants to drill down and show you various theories that are out there that might be affecting your city, because cities have governments and cities have urban planners, and they are being affected by, or they're being driven by, particular views of what the city is and how it changes. And so what we're going to do is spend a little time, first of all, looking at the trends that are actually happening out there, but then looking at some of what those theories are and how Christians should be developing their own understanding of how a city changes. So this is all new, and I think it's going to be an exciting thing to talk about, and I'm going to be very high level here for just the next 10, 15 minutes. But first of all, there's these trends that we talk about a lot. The first trend, of course, is enormous growth. That's going to continue pretty much this entire century. And what we're going to see is, just as in Europe, eventually what happened in Europe and in Australia was about 75-80% of the people live in the cities. That's happening in North America. It's happening in Latin America. It's actually, Latin America is pretty close to that now. It will happen also in Asia, and it probably the last place where is Africa, where it's going to take longer there to get to that 75-80%. But eventually, by the end of the century, pretty much everywhere in the world, 75-80% of the people will be living in cities. And that's, what's our ministry response? Our ministry response is the people of the world are moving into cities faster than the church is, and the church needs to move into the cities with the people. Number two, there's going to be greater connection between the cities. That is to say, the great global cities are going to merge more and more into each other all the time. They are extraordinarily connected by travel, by technology. More and more you're going to see the people that live in one great global city, they go to the same schools, they work for the same companies, very often they eat the same kind of food, they have a lot of the same values, and therefore, the ministry response here, the second ministry response, which is very important, that is what City to City believes, is that we need to stay together. That is, we need to stay connected, because there's overlap between successful, effective ministry in one city and effective ministry in another city. That is, if you find a successful urban ministry in Tokyo, that is something that people in Africa and Europe and Latin America can learn from, because the great cities are so much like each other. Number three, so besides the growth and greater connection, number three, there's going to be greater and greater complexity. Traditionally, cities started from a center that had the greatest density and diversity, that is to say, of buildings and operations. So you had more people, and you had a mixture of retail and workplace and cultural institutions and government institutions and residences, and you had it all there. And then radiating out from that center, you had other sorts of communities, some of which were more dense, some of which were less dense, some of which are more prosperous, some of which are less prosperous. But that's probably going to stop. That is to say, in the future, cities are going to get more and more complicated, more and more complex. You're going to have multiple nucleated cities, multi-nucleated cities, meaning you're going to have cities in which you have more than one center, downtown business center. You're also going to find that the cities are going to become less and less predictable all the time. And what is the ministry response here? It won't be enough for you just to love your city, dear friends. You're going to have to learn your city. You're going to have to be constant students of your city. One of the dangers of living in a city a long time is you think, well, I understand it, I've been here a long time, but the city's changing so fast that very often the city's different than the city you, when you first move to a city, you learn a lot about it, and then you think you know it. But cities are constantly changing, and therefore you have to be constantly a student of your city. Number 4, declining birth rates. What happens in cities is, in general, the birth rates go down in cities because it's expensive, because it's more complicated. So in general, people in cities have smaller families or fewer families than people in the countryside or in the towns. And what that does mean for us as ministry leaders is that not only do we have, as churches, do we have to support people who want to get married and raise their children in the city. We have to be very supportive of that, not just assume that that can be done easily. But there's also going to be more singles in cities than in other places, and we have to be just as affirming of them. And that's not easy to do. To really affirm the singles and at the same time really affirm the family, it is not easy to do. And yet that is what we're called to. And lastly, there's just going to be greater economic inequality. A shrinking middle class in most cities. It's still going to be it's going to be still, to a great degree, cities are going to be a mixture of rich and poor. And churches have got to be a way of building bridges so that the rich are using their wealth to benefit the entire city. Churches are going to have to really be committed to doing justice in their cities and in their neighborhoods. Now, that's the trends. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about are the theories of how cities actually work and change. And in the white paper, you're going to see that I do apologize a little bit to my non-Western brothers and sisters, because I'm pulling out 4 theories of how cities operate and change that are largely Western ideas, and these social theories have been developed in Western countries. The thing that's true, however, is that very often these theories migrate around the world. That's just the way it is. That very often things that happen in the West that migrate, and very often they don't really apply, but very often people try to apply them. Anyway, what's interesting about these theories is to study them so that we can come to our own understanding of how a city works. And one approach is I'll just mention the ones that I mentioned. The Chicago School, which was developed at the University of Chicago, basically sees cities as places where community falls apart. It's a pretty negative view of cities. And it's a place where it says people move to cities because they have to get jobs, but then their communities fall apart, and there's not the same accountability you have in a small town or in a rural area. The critique of that is that there really is more community in cities than they would like to let on, but they're partly right. That cities can be places of less accountability. It's easier to hide in cities and to be alone and to avoid community in cities than it is in a small town. The second school is the critical urban school, which basically is a Marxist school, which sees the entire, what they see city as basically a place of oppression, a place where the rich go to make money, accumulate money, and to basically oppress everybody else. And having lived in New York City for 33 years going on, there's much truth to that. There are powerful people who really, in cities, are able to control so much that goes on. And yet, it's an oversimplification to say the city is a place of nothing but oppression. There are ways for immigrants, for example, to come here and to start with very little and to develop themselves. And so it's not as simple as the rich just keep the poor down and there's no way to advance. On the other hand, it's largely true. Okay, there's there's the critical urban school, the Chicago school. There's the Los Angeles school that really says just try to make it sees the city as just incredibly complex, completely uncontrollable, totally unpredictable, fragmented and fractured, and you shouldn't try to make it any better. You should just try to survive and enjoy how strange it is. And then and by the way, that's the one that I think as Christians we have the most trouble with in some ways. I feel like it's it's much more, it ends up being a pretty selfish approach, which is to say, kind of enjoy the chaos, get to a place where you can kind of munch on your popcorn and watch it, and just try your best to, create your own little enclave of safety. And it's a little too pessimistic, I think, for most Christians, and yet there's something to it. I already mentioned that one of the trends is that cities are not that easy to control. Then lastly, there's the urban culturalist school of Richard Florida and others, who see the city as a place where you go to develop yourself. And they see it's very positive. They see it as a place where you come and you develop yourself, and you build cities that really help. The cities of diversity and beauty, and where great ideas happen, and this is where the culture changes. This is where the future happens. Very, very positive. Again, it's partly right. It's just partly right. And a Christian needs to say, none of these things are ways that cities actually function. And you need to be working on, and this is, I need to close here, we need to be thinking about, well, what is a biblical approach to this? And the answer is, as we saw in the 9th white paper, is the Bible actually speaks to virtually all of these things. So there probably is a Christian theory of change, a way of saying, here's what we ought to be doing in cities in order to help them in small ways, to change for the better for the people who live in them. But I don't think we have done much thinking about this, but city to city is the place where that kind of thinking has to happen. City to city is the place where we need to start that kind of thinking on the basis of what we know from the Bible. One last thing, and it is very last, is I'm going to quickly read off a little list of what I consider urban skills. You cannot function in cities without these urban skills, and here they are. You need to be very culturally sensitive. That is, you really need to be able to not assume or stereotype people of different cultures, but be very open to them, very sensitive to them, appreciate all of them, know how to do cross-cultural communication. Extraordinarily important, number one. Number two, you need to be able to teach people how to integrate their faith in their work. Because many, many people in cities come in order to work. That's where Richard Florida is right. A lot of people come to cities to make their mark. And you have to be able to show Christians in particular how they aren't here just to get better careers, but to serve people through a Christian integrating their faith with their work. Number three, you need to know how to do complex evangelism. There is no one-size-fits-all in the city. You cannot evangelize the same way with everybody. It just doesn't work. Number four, you need to understand the very difficult to define ability to connect with urban people. Urban people tend to be more ironic. Urban people tend to have higher production values. Urban people don't like slickness, they like authenticity. Urban people are open to change. There's all sorts of small ways in which there's an urban sensibility that a minister in the city has to learn. And then lastly, I'll just say this. You have to be extraordinarily connected to your neighborhood. There's many places in which suburban, I know as a pastor of a suburban church, I could assume my neighborhood functioned well. The local school was going to work well, that this local social services worked well, but you can't assume that in your neighborhoods. And you need to be deeply involved with your neighborhood. Nevertheless, these are all kinds of ways in which we have to be living out what it means to be Christian ministers in the city. So thanks for listening.